Do you remember the funniest things from the 1970s that would get you arrested today when danger was just part of everyday life? These things filled playgrounds, streets, and homes, shaping childhoods with risks nobody thought twice about. Looking back now, is it funny or a little frightening that we survived them? Kids riding in the back of pickup trucks was the Saturday thrill ride poor families never paid for. Forget theme parks or roller coasters. The real excitement came from climbing into the truck bed, gripping the sides, and feeling the wind blast your face as Dad barreled down the road. Nobody wore helmets, nobody thought about safety, and parents waved from the cab like it was the most normal thing in the world. Some kids stood up and pretended to surf while the truck sped down dirt roads. Others sprawled flat, faces pressed to the metal, trying to hang on as the bumps rattled them like dice in a cup. Every sharp turn turned into a competition. Who could stay standing and who went flying into a pile of siblings? Dogs barked and chased from yard to yard, trying to keep up with the rolling circus. Neighbors often waved back, probably wondering how many kids were going to survive that ride. Every bump in the road sent kids bouncing like popcorn, squealing with laughter, sometimes smacking elbows or knees against the metal. Dogs often joined the chaos, tongues flapping in the breeze, adding to the circus. Looking back, it was basically a moving lawsuit on wheels, but in the 70s, it felt like pure freedom. Pickup trucks doubled as family vans, amusement rides, and even parade floats whenever kids waved to other cars. Today, it would get parents pulled over instantly, but back then, it was just another weekend adventure. Buying beer for Dad at the corner store was the kind of errand that made every kid feel grown up. Mom would scribble a note, something like, "Please sell Johnny a six-pack for his father," and the cashier accepted it without hesitation. Imagine a child barely tall enough to see over the counter, lugging glass bottles of beer back home like it was a loaf of bread. Some kids tucked the note into their pocket like a secret code, grinning when the cashier didn't even bother reading it. Others puffed out their chest proudly, feeling like little adults trusted with a big job. Sometimes, if the kid was a regular, the clerk didn't even ask for a note, just handed over the beer and maybe a pack of smokes for good measure. Carrying those heavy bottles made you feel strong, even if they clinked dangerously in the bag. Marching home with Dad's six-pack felt like a mission accomplished. Sometimes the clerk even tossed in a pack of smokes, no questions asked. Kids beamed with pride walking out the door, not realizing they were basically participating in an undercover crime ring. Parents saw it as convenience. The law today would see it as contributing to the delinquency of a minor. Still, for a kid in the 70s, that corner store run was a rite of passage. Seatbelt-free joyrides in station wagons were standard practice. Families piled in, kids sprawled across the massive back seat, older siblings camped out in the rear-facing seat, and toddlers bouncing freely on vinyl cushions. Nobody clicked in because most cars did not even have working belts, or if they did, nobody used them. The rear-facing seat became a theater box, where kids made faces at the drivers behind them. Brothers wrestled in the back, sisters sprawled out reading comic books, and somebody was always lying sideways across the whole bench. Food and toys rolled around the floor with every sharp turn, and no one cared if juice spilled because it would dry up by morning. A sudden brake slammed everyone forward into the front seat, which was just shrugged off with laughter. The chaos of movement was simply part of the fun. Brakes slammed, and everyone flew forward like bowling pins, only to laugh it off. Road trips became rolling playgrounds where snacks were tossed like footballs and naps happened across laps. It was chaos, it was unsafe, and somehow everyone survived. Today, police would be handing out tickets by the stack, but in the 1970s, it was just called family time. Smoking in the grocery store is one of those things that sounds absurd now, but raised zero eyebrows in the 70s. Parents pushed carts down the aisles with a cigarette dangling from their lips, ash balancing dangerously as they grabbed a box of cereal. The produce section smelled like lettuce mixed with secondhand smoke, and nobody flinched. Some parents even handed the cigarette to a child to hold it while they bagged apples. Ashtrays were bolted to the ends of shopping carts so you could puff and push at the same time. Clerks lit up while stocking soup cans, leaving little trails of ash on the linoleum floors. Every aisle had a faint haze, blending with the cold mist spraying over vegetables. Shopping was less about fresh air and more about breathing in a smoky haze of community life. Sometimes ash even flicked onto packages of bread or stacked apples, brushed off like it was nothing. Store clerks smoked while stocking shelves, casually exhaling into the frozen food section. To modernize, it is a nightmare. But back then, it was everyday normal. A trip to buy milk and eggs also came with a free cloud of smoke, courtesy of every adult in the store. Carrying toy guns that looked real was another everyday thing that would have kids in handcuffs today. The plastic pistols and rifles were dark, heavy, and practically indistinguishable from the real thing. Kids strutted through neighborhoods waving them around, playing cops and robbers in broad daylight. Some kids even spray-painted them silver or black to make them look cooler, unknowingly making them even more realistic. They were tucked into belts, slung across backs, and pointed dramatically in mock standoffs on the front lawn. Parents laughed from porches while neighbors cheered on pretend shootouts. Kids played ambush in alleys and backyards, leaping out with toy rifles like mini soldiers. Nobody saw danger in it. It was just fun. No orange safety tips, no neon colors, just realistic weapons in the hands of 8-year-olds. Police drove by without stopping, parents barely glanced, and everyone laughed when mock shootouts broke out on the front lawn. Today, the same scene would trigger a SWAT response, but in the 1970s, it was just called playtime. Poor kids especially treasured them because a $2 toy meant hours of endless fun. Leaving kids alone in the car while grocery shopping was completely normal. Parents parked in the lot, told the kids to stay put, and disappeared inside for 20 minutes or more. Windows rolled up, sun blazing, kids fidgeted in sticky vinyl seats with nothing but a sibling squabble to pass the time. Some kids climbed into the driver's seat and pretended to steer, honking the horn until everyone jumped. Others pressed their faces against the glass, making goofy expressions at passers-by. The smell of vinyl mixed with sweat and half-melted crayons in the glove box was unforgettable. Some lucky kids fiddled with the radio, spinning the dial until static filled the air. The less lucky ones were stuck staring at the parking lot clock, waiting for mom to come back with groceries. Sometimes parents even left the keys in the ignition with the radio on, turning the car into a makeshift babysitter. Older siblings assumed command, but arguments usually erupted within minutes. Today, Child Protective Services would be called before mom even reached the produce aisle. But in the 70s, it was just another way families got errands done. Riding in the front seat as a toddler was practically a family tradition. Small kids either bounced on the bench seat beside mom or perched on dad's lap, helping steer the wheel. Car seats existed, but they looked like metal torture devices, so most families ignored them. Toddlers loved standing up on the seat, hands gripping the dashboard like they were captains of a ship. At red lights, some kids leaned out the window, hair blowing wildly in the breeze. Some even pretended to shift imaginary gears or honk the horn like they owned the road. Parents laughed instead of worrying, proud that their little driver was taking charge. Long drives turned into games of counting cars or waving at truckers who always honked back. The smell of vinyl mixed with cigarette smoke made the ride feel like its own world. Looking back, it is hard to believe nobody thought twice about letting toddlers ride shotgun. Parents beamed proudly as little ones steered through the driveway, pretending to control the massive car. On long drives, naps happened, stretched across the entire seat, no restraints in sight. One quick brake check and everyone rolled forward into the dashboard like it was nothing. Toddlers slid side to side during turns, giggling while parents reached out a single arm to keep them from falling. Seatbelts stayed tucked into the seat cracks, never touched. Today, it would be a reckless endangerment charge, but back then, it was considered adorable. A front seat toddler was just part of family driving culture in the 1970s. Parents giving kids sips of beer or wine at parties was not only normal, it was considered good parenting. Adults called it teaching responsibility, handing over a foamy sip of beer or a watered-down glass of wine. Kids wrinkled their noses, laughed at the bitterness, and ran off to play. Sometimes uncles made a show of it, raising their glass and declaring, "Make a man out of him." Relatives chuckled as kids pretended to stumble dramatically after a sip. Some parents even bragged about their kids being beer-trained, showing them off at barbecues. Grandparents chuckled knowingly, saying this was how it had always been done. Nobody worried about laws or child services. It was seen as harmless fun. Kids strutted around parties feeling special for being included. It was less about alcohol and more about being treated like part of the adult world. Beer cans were passed casually between adults and children without a second thought. A sip of wine at Christmas or Thanksgiving was practically a rite of passage. Parents defended it by saying kids would not sneak around later if they learned early. Relatives bragged about letting their kids learn early so they would not go wild later. Nobody thought it strange. Nobody called it illegal, and kids strutted around proudly after their first grown-up sip. Today, it would spark outrage, but in the 1970s, it was a family ritual. Poor families especially saw it as harmless, a way to include the kids in the celebration without spending money on soda. Smoking in restaurants with the kids at the table was an everyday sight. Families sat in red vinyl booths, pancakes stacked high, while mom puffed on a Marlboro between bites. Ashtrays filled with cigarette butts sat beside the syrup pitcher. The air was so thick with smoke you could barely see the neon signs on the wall. Kids stirred straws through chocolate milk as ash drifted lazily past their faces. Sometimes the smoke clung to pancakes before the syrup even hit the table. Ashtrays filled faster than coffee cups, forcing waitresses to swap them out mid-meal. The smell of bacon, coffee, and cigarettes mixed into one unforgettable diner perfume. Children learned to tune out coughing fits while chomping on waffles. For adults, it was considered atmosphere, not a hazard. Waitresses balanced trays of food in one hand and flicked ashes with the other, all while keeping a smile. The clink of forks mixed with the tap of lighters as diners sparked up without hesitation. To kids, the smoky haze became as normal as the smell of bacon and coffee. Sometimes smoke curled into a child's face, and they coughed before taking another forkful of eggs. Waitresses served food with one hand and balanced a cigarette in the other. It sounds unthinkable now, but in the 70s, smoke-filled diners were the heartbeat of family outings. The idea of smoking sections did not exist. Every table was a smoking table. Hitchhiking to the mall was a legitimate transportation method in the 1970s. Teens and even younger kids stuck their thumbs out on the side of the road, confident that some friendly stranger would stop. Parents rarely worried, and kids bragged about how quickly they caught a ride. Sometimes rides came from neighbors, other times from total strangers. But nobody blinked. Groups of kids piled into the back seat of beat-up sedans, chattering the whole way to the mall. Drivers rarely asked questions. Sometimes they gave advice, sometimes just a smile. Radios blasted rock and roll while cigarette smoke curled through the windows. Kids swapped stories about the coolest rides they'd gotten, turning it into a badge of honor. Police cars even passed by without stopping, assuming hitchhiking was just part of daily life. Looking back, the risks were everywhere, but nobody thought twice about it. Some drivers smoked, some blasted the radio, and kids thought it was the height of adventure. Hitchhiking was seen as a practical solution, not a risk. Stories of kids getting into trouble existed, but most brushed them off as just rumors. It was a blend of trust and naivety that would horrify parents today. Stories of danger existed, but most brushed them off as rare exceptions. For kids without cars or bus money, hitchhiking was simply how you got where you needed to go. Looking back, it seems reckless, but in the 70s, it was normal, and everyone remembers it. Trick-or-treating until midnight with no adults was a rite of passage in the 1970s. Once the sun went down, entire neighborhoods transformed into a candy-collecting free-for-all, and parents barely paid attention. A pillowcase or brown paper bag was your ticket, and you ran wild with your friends, pounding on doors until porch lights flickered off. Kids cut across yards, darted into alleys, and bragged about who scored the most candy bars. Streetlights meant nothing. The game was still on, long after dark. The older kids led the charge, dragging younger siblings along like soldiers in a candy army. Piles of chocolate bars and hard candy were dumped onto bedroom floors at the end of the night, traded like baseball cards. Nobody checked for tampering, and homemade treats were eaten without hesitation. Running out of candy was the only real danger. The freedom of the night made kids feel unstoppable. No costumes with reflective tape, no glow sticks, just kids disappearing into the night with nothing but sugar-fueled energy. Some bags ripped open halfway through the night, spilling candy all over the pavement. But that was part of the adventure. Strangers handed out treats without suspicion, and nobody checked wrappers for safety. Today, parents would never let a 6-year-old roam streets past bedtime, but in the 70s, it was just part of the fun. Parents leaving kids home alone overnight was another normal move in the 1970s. Maybe mom and dad had a wedding to attend or a late shift at work, and suddenly the oldest child, sometimes barely 12 years old, was promoted to babysitter-in-chief. Rules were simple: keep the doors locked, do not burn the house down, and maybe feed your younger siblings. Parents trusted kids to survive on frozen pizza, cartoons, and their own common sense. Today, a single phone call to Child Protective Services would bring authorities to the door. But back then, it was just called growing up. Siblings fought, made messes, and occasionally stayed up all night. But everyone survived. The next morning, parents returned to chaos, shrugged, and carried on. It was independence disguised as parenting, and poor kids especially learned responsibility early whether they wanted it or not. Helmets? What helmets? In the 1970s, kids flew down streets on banana seat bikes, roller skated on cracked sidewalks, and zipped around on skateboards with zero protective gear. Bruised knees and scraped elbows were a daily badge of honor. If you came home without a new scab, people assumed you had not been outside long enough. Some kids even showed off their wounds like trophies, bragging about who had the biggest scrape. A cracked tooth or sprained wrist was brushed off as part of the adventure. Falls were expected, blood was shrugged off, and the solution was usually a garden hose rinse and a Band-Aid. Nobody thought twice about head injuries. If you crashed hard, you just got back up. Helmets existed, but they were for football players, not kids riding bikes around the block. Parents watched from porches, sipping coffee, laughing when kids toppled into bushes. A trip to the emergency room only happened if something was obviously broken. Looking back, it is amazing how many survived without serious injury. But for kids of the 70s, it was just part of the ride. BB gun target practice in the backyard was standard entertainment. Kids lined up soda cans on fences, stacked bottles in rows, and fired away like miniature sharpshooters. No safety goggles, no supervision, and usually no backstop, just pellets flying wherever they landed. Sometimes the BBs bounced back and stung, sending kids yelping before they laughed it off. Other times, the targets were way too ambitious. Windows, mailboxes, or even a squirrel darting across the fence. Parents heard the shots from the porch and barely looked up, figuring kids were just getting their practice in. Sometimes a ricochet stung a leg or a sibling, but the game went on. Parents brushed it off as good training, never mind the risks. Siblings dared each other to shoot farther, straighter, or closer to targets that definitely should not have been used. Bird baths, windows, even old toys. BB guns were sold like toys in stores, and kids carried them openly in neighborhoods without a second glance. Today, it would spark a police call in minutes, but in the 1970s, BB guns were simply another part of growing up. Lighting firecrackers in the driveway was practically a summer sport. The 4th of July was only the excuse. Kids had free rein with matches and explosives anytime they got their hands on them. Little hands struck matches, sparks flew, and nobody cared about fire safety. Some firecrackers fizzled instead of popping, and daring kids ran back to relight them, sometimes with painful results. Others tied them together in bundles, creating ear-splitting chaos that rattled windows up and down the street. The smell of sulfur clung to clothes and hair long after the smoke cleared. Fingers got singed, driveways smoked, and parents mostly yelled about the noise, not the danger. Sometimes firecrackers went off too close, leaving kids stunned and half-deaf, but everyone laughed it off. The thrill was the sound, the danger, and the freedom to play with fire, literally. Today, any kid caught lighting fireworks unsupervised would face fines and furious parents, but in the 1970s, it was considered part of summer fun. Fireworks stands on every corner made it even easier for kids to get into trouble. For a few coins, children could walk away with bags full of explosives, bottle rockets, Roman candles, cherry bombs, without a single question asked. Vendors sold to anyone, no ID required, often encouraging kids to go big. Friends pooled allowances to buy the loudest, brightest options, then raced off to see who could set them off fastest. The stands themselves were ramshackle tables piled high with cardboard boxes, usually run by a teenager barely older than the customers. Kids walked away with paper sacks bulging with explosives, clutched proudly like treasure. Bottle rockets whizzed sideways into garages, Roman candles fired across lawns, and cherry bombs rattled trash cans like grenades. Parents shook their heads at the noise, then lit their own sparklers a few minutes later. It was reckless, smoky chaos, but it was the soundtrack of summer. Parents knew, shrugged, and occasionally joined in. The sound of fireworks cracked through neighborhoods all summer long, not just on the 4th of July. Accidents happened, burns were common, but no one saw it as a reason to stop. Today, it would be a public safety nightmare, but in the 1970s, fireworks stands were a fixture of childhood. Homemade playground swings with chains and tires were a staple of backyards. Parents or neighbors strung up an old tire from a tree, looped some metal chains through, and called it a swing. The tire reeked of rubber, the chains pinched fingers, and kids often flipped upside down, but nobody minded. Splinters from the tree or burns from hot chains were part of the game. Some tires still had patches of mud or grease, leaving streaks on kids' clothes after every ride. The chains clanked and squeaked as the swing soared higher, daring kids to see who could go the farthest without falling off. Sometimes the rope or chain snapped mid-swing, sending someone tumbling across the yard, but laughter usually followed. Friends lined up, waiting impatiently for their turn, pushing each other harder than any adult would have dared. That dirty old tire was more thrilling than the fanciest playground equipment today. It was dangerous, messy, and absolutely unforgettable. Hours disappeared as kids spun each other until they tumbled out dizzy. The swings groaned, sometimes snapped, but always got patched together again. Today, safety inspectors would have nightmares, but back then it was the ultimate backyard thrill ride. Tetherball poles with concrete bases turned recess into survival training. Every schoolyard had one. A tall pole with a ball on a rope surrounded by bare dirt. Kids slammed the ball as hard as they could, ropes whipped around, and bodies went flying. When the ball missed, heads or hands often hit the concrete base with a sickening thud. Teachers barely looked up from their coffee. This was exercise. Shoes kicked up dust clouds as kids battled fiercely for bragging rights. Rope burns on hands were common, and the ball itself often smelled like sweaty palms and playground dirt. Games escalated into shouting matches, with losers demanding rematches while winners strutted away like champions. Even kids who got clocked in the face came back for another round. The pole was unforgiving, but the competition was addictive. Fights broke out over rules, balls hit faces, and kids went home bruised daily. But tetherball was addictive, a mix of competition, pain, and pride. Looking back, it seems insane that schools let kids bash themselves into concrete. But in the 1970s, it was just recess. Walking to school alone in first grade was perfectly normal. Parents kissed you goodbye, pointed toward the street, and trusted you to make it there. 6-year-olds walked blocks, crossed intersections, and navigated neighborhoods on their own. Backpacks dragged low, shoelaces untied, and kids traveled in little packs, waving at neighbors. Crossing guards were rare, so kids learned quickly to dash across streets between cars. The walk was often half the adventure, filled with dares, shortcuts, and secret candy stops at corner stores. Kids memorized landmarks like the big oak tree or the red mailbox as guides, long before GPS. Some trudged through rain or snow in clothes that barely fit, but complaining was useless. You still walked. That independence felt huge, even if your legs were small. Nobody hovered, nobody tracked locations, and parents assumed you would figure it out. Getting lost was part of the learning curve. Today, the sight of a first grader alone on the sidewalk would spark a police call. But in the 1970s, independence was expected early. Selling cookies door-to-door without adults was another neighborhood tradition. Whether it was school fundraisers, Girl Scouts, or church drives, kids roamed blocks knocking on strangers' doors with boxes in hand. They carried cash in pockets, made change on porches, and walked into homes to deliver orders without hesitation. Strangers invited kids in to sit at tables, write receipts, and drink a glass of milk before leaving. Sometimes the money pouch jingled with coins, so heavy kids could barely carry it. Friends made competitions out of who could sell the most boxes, racing between houses until dark. Adults chatted with children at the door without suspicion, sometimes inviting them to pet the family dog before leaving. Neighbors rarely turned kids away, even if they already had a freezer full of cookies. They bought out of community loyalty. For kids, it felt like running a small business, long before anyone thought about permits. Nobody worried about safety. It was just community. Parents rarely supervised, trusting neighborhoods to look after kids. Today, it would be unthinkable, but in the 1970s, door-to-door sales built confidence and gave every kid a taste of responsibility. Selling lemonade on busy streets was the universal childhood business plan of the 1970s. There were no permits, no health inspections, no sanitation rules, just a plastic pitcher, a box of Dixie cups, and maybe a hand-scrawled sign taped to the card table that read, "Lemonade, 10 cents." The lemonade itself was rarely fresh squeezed. It was usually country time powder stirred into tap water with a wooden spoon, sometimes by hands that had just been digging in the sandbox. Kids set up shop on the busiest street corners, dodging traffic to hand drivers' lukewarm lemonade through rolled-down windows. Coins clinked into shoeboxes as payment, sticky change handled by the same hands dunking cups into the pitcher. Parents rarely supervised, watching from porches or not at all, trusting neighbors to keep an eye on things. Some stands lasted an hour before collapsing in the heat, while others became all-day enterprises with friends joining in as employees. There was no concept of liability, no one worried about germs, and everyone just saw it as a cute summer ritual. Today, inspectors would shut it down in 5 minutes flat, citing safety, permits, and food codes. But in the 1970s, lemonade stands were more than a way to make a few coins. They were a symbol of childhood hustle and freedom. Sharing one fountain soda with 6 straws was the height of family bonding in the 1970s. Families on a budget did not splurge on 6 separate sodas at the diner or drive-in. Instead, they ordered one jumbo cup, stuck in a bundle of straws, and passed it around like communion. The soda went flat within minutes, but nobody cared. The first sip was golden, ice-cold fizz rushing through a fresh straw. By the 3rd or 4th person, it was half-melted syrup with a hint of backwash. Kids laughed as straws tangled together, sometimes slurping at the same time like it was a competition. Parents considered it economical, kids thought it was hilarious, and nobody mentioned germs. That one soda stretched across the entire table, teaching kids that sharing, even if it was saliva, was just part of family life. Today, health inspectors would faint at the sight, but in the 70s, it was simply how families made a dime go further. Bringing peanut butter sandwiches everywhere was the poor kids' version of convenience food. No lunchbox in the 1970s was complete without at least one peanut butter and jelly sandwich wrapped in wax paper or a reused bread bag. It was the universal fuel, taken to school, packed for field trips, stuffed in pockets on bike rides. Nobody thought about peanut allergies because nobody seemed to have them, or if they did, schools ignored it. Lunch tables reeked of peanut butter, sticky hands smeared it on desks, and teachers rolled their eyes as kids traded them like currency. Peanut butter sandwiches showed up at every ball game, picnic, and playground, and nobody ever sent a note home warning about banned foods. The bread was usually store-brand white, the jelly spread unevenly, and sometimes the sandwich got squished into a pancake at the bottom of the bag. But kids still devoured them, licking their fingers clean. Today, parents would be fined for sending peanut butter into most schools, but in the 70s, it was practically required. School bake sales with homemade food were a regular fundraiser in the 1970s, and they were as unregulated as it gets. Kids and parents brought in whatever they had: brownies, cookies, Rice Krispie treats, and pies baked in mismatched pans. Nothing was wrapped, nothing was labeled, and nobody had a clue what ingredients were inside. Sometimes you picked up a brownie with a smudge of foil still baked onto the bottom. Other times, you bit into a cupcake and swore you tasted cigarette smoke from the kitchen where it was made. Nobody minded. Food was food, and the fact that it came from someone's home kitchen made it feel special. Coins and dollar bills stuffed into coffee cans paid for sports uniforms and band trips, while sticky trays of desserts disappeared by lunchtime. Allergies, calories, and sanitation simply did not cross anyone's mind. Today, schools would shut down such a sale instantly. But back then, homemade bake sales were a beloved community event that connected parents, teachers, and kids with sugar and trust. Smoking sections in airplanes were one of the strangest normalcies of the 1970s. Imagine cramming into a pressurized metal tube, shoulder to shoulder with strangers, and then lighting up a cigarette at 30,000 feet. It happened every day. The smoking section was usually just a few rows in the middle of the plane, separated from non-smokers by nothing more than a tiny sign. Smoke filled the cabin regardless, drifting into every seat as if the whole plane had become one giant ashtray. Flight attendants passed peanuts with one hand and ashtrays with the other, balancing trays while smoke curled up around their faces. Kids coughed, passengers waved smoke away with airline napkins, and nobody dared complain. It was normal, it was accepted, and it turned every flight into a floating haze of tobacco. Today, the idea sounds ridiculous. But in the 1970s, lighting up at cruising altitude was just part of air travel. Mixtapes were handwritten love letters wrapped in cassette cases. You waited by the radio for hours just to hit record at the perfect moment, trying to catch the start of your favorite song without the DJ talking over it. You rewound, replayed, and carefully curated the perfect order so each track melted into the next. Some were made for crushes, others for best friends. Some were sorry tapes, and some were just because. Each one had a theme, a purpose, and a heart behind it. You picked songs that said what you could not. Then you labeled the tape in your best handwriting, maybe decorated the case, and handed it over like it was treasure. Because it was. A great mixtape took hours, sometimes days, to get just right. And when someone gave you one, you listened to it until the tape wore thin and the sound warped. Mixtapes were not just music, they were memories, feelings, time capsules wrapped in magnetic ribbon. And long after the songs faded, you remembered the person who made it, their handwriting, their choices, their message. Even now, in a world of playlists, nothing hits quite like the soft click of a tape deck and a song you once recorded just for someone else. Heating only one room in winter was not just a strategy, it was survival. The whole house might be freezing, but one space stayed warm. Maybe it was the living room with a kerosene heater. Maybe the kitchen with the oven door cracked open. You brought in extra blankets. You wore your coat indoors. Everyone piled in, like penguins sharing body heat. You did homework at the coffee table, ate soup from mismatched bowls, slept on the couch or a pile of comforters laid out on the floor. The hallway felt like Antarctica. The bathroom? A short, icy sprint. At night, the cold crept into your bones, but during the day, you all huddled in that one room like it was the center of the universe. Parents told kids to keep the door shut, do not let the heat out. No one dared argue. It was about bills, about making it to spring. And even though it felt unfair at the time, it also brought people close. Literally, you learned to share space, to pass the time, to be warm in more ways than one. Heating one room was not ideal, but it was home, and somehow it got you through. Before Fandango or streaming apps told us what was playing, there was the operator, and calling the theater was an event in itself. You would dial a number, usually a long one, and wait as a robotic voice or sometimes an actual person listed off every movie in Showtime like it was the State of the Union. Showtimes for the weekend of July 24th, Gremlins at 7:30, The Goonies at 9:15, Ghostbusters at 10:45. You could not skip ahead. You had to listen carefully, and maybe even write it down if you were planning a big night. If someone in the house picked up the phone while you were listening, forget it. You had to start over. And if you called during a busy hour, good luck hearing anything over the static and background noise. But it was still exciting. The build-up, the anticipation. You felt like you were about to join something important, something bigger than yourself. Because back then, watching a movie meant going somewhere. It meant tickets, seats, sticky floors, and that one kid who always threw popcorn. It meant magic. But if you wanted movie magic at home, you did not need a theater. You just needed to clear your schedule, grab the good blanket, and stake your claim on the couch. Walk into an old house and open a closet door, and you might get hit with a smell that is oddly comforting, woody, warm, a little spicy. That would be cedar, not a scent diffuser, not a spray. Actual cedar wood, lined across the walls of the closet from top to bottom. These cedar-lined closets were the silent guardians of America's wardrobes. They protected against moths, mildew, and musty smells. But they also added a kind of rustic luxury, like storing your clothes inside a tree trunk at a high-end cabin. The idea was simple. Cedar wood naturally repels insects, so why not turn your entire closet into a bug-proof haven? People did not just store coats in there, they kept heirlooms, wool suits, and seasonal clothes safe year-round. Some closets were fully lined, others just had a single cedar panel on one wall. Either way, it gave the whole room a spa vibe long before that was a thing. These days, you might see cedar blocks or hangers sold in stores, but entire closets made of the stuff? That has faded into the woodwork, literally. The world got synthetic, and the cedar charm became a relic. But if you think that was clever, wait until you see how people used to pass food across rooms without ever leaving their chair. Leg warmers were a fashion miracle, pointless and perfect all at once. Originally designed for dancers to keep their muscles warm, they jumped out of the studio and into the mainstream thanks to aerobics videos and pop culture icons. Suddenly, everyone was wearing them. Over tights, over jeans, even over bare legs. They came in neon, in stripes, in fluffy pastels. Some matched outfits, others clashed proudly. And they served no actual purpose unless you were stretching at a bar or leaping across a dance floor. But no one cared. Leg warmers made you feel like you were part of something glamorous and athletic, even if the closest you got to working out was lifting a hairbrush to lip sync in the mirror. Schools were filled with rows of students rocking scrunched-up fabric around their shins. Some slouched them just above the ankle. Others pulled them high like woolly socks from the future. They were soft, they were cozy, and they were everywhere. Looking back, they might seem silly, but they were fun, expressive, and totally 1980s. And for a few years, they made everyone feel like a star in their own low-budget dance movie. Wearing patches on clothes was less about style and more about grit. Holes in the knees, sewn shut with denim cut from old jeans, elbows wearing thin, covered in colorful scraps stitched with uneven lines and quiet determination. Every patch was a story, a game of tag gone too far, a tumble off a bike, a season of growth that stretched fabric past its limit. You did not throw things out, you fixed them. Because replacing a pair of pants was not always an option. Your mom had a sewing kit in an old cookie tin, filled with thread that never matched and buttons that had seen better days. She worked at the kitchen table, bent over your clothes like a surgeon, making something broken last just a little longer. You might have felt embarrassed. You might have tugged your sleeves to hide the stitching. But those patches were love in disguise. They meant someone cared enough to keep you dressed, even if the clothes were tired. They meant you kept going. Sometimes those patches were loud. Bright fabric that clashed with the shirt, a cartoon print stitched onto plain denim, whatever scrap was closest to the sewing basket. And sometimes they were nearly invisible, matched carefully to hide what had torn. Either way, you knew where they were. You could trace each one with your fingers. They scratched a little when new. They softened over time. On cold mornings, you sat still while your mom pinned a square over a frayed spot, asking you to hold your arms up or turn around so she could get it right. It was uncomfortable, but it meant you were cared for. No one wasted thread on clothes they did not plan to keep, and no one stayed up late mending knees if they did not believe you were worth the effort. Some patches covered wear and tear, others covered stains you could never quite get out. But all of them did the same thing. They gave your clothes a second life, and in the process, they gave you a quiet kind of dignity. You might not have had new clothes, but you had something better. Clothes that were saved, like you, again and again. And in a world where appearances mattered too much, patches were the proof that making do was still doing enough. You were worn, but you were whole. Public service announcements in the 1980s were something else. You would be watching cartoons or a sitcom, then suddenly, boom. The screen would cut to a gray filter, eerie music, and a serious voice saying, "This is your brain. This is your brain on drugs." Or a crash dummy flying through a windshield, or a puppet warning you not to talk to strangers. They were dramatic, unsettling, and weirdly unforgettable. One minute you were giggling at Garfield. The next you were wondering if touching a light socket would make you disappear forever. These announcements were designed to scare you straight, and they worked. They haunted your dreams and followed you into adulthood. Some used animation. Some used real actors with tear-streaked cheeks and slow zooms, and all of them felt like they were speaking directly to you. But even with the ominous tones, there was something strangely comforting about them, like the world was trying to look out for you, even if it scared you a little. They were a strange part of growing up, and honestly, we would be lying if we said we did not remember them word for word. Still, if there was one thing that really balanced it all out, it was the glory of waking up at sunrise for the lineup of legends. You have seen them in diners, office buildings, and those oddly retro suburban homes from the mid-20th century, glass block windows. These chunky, square panels were not quite clear and not quite frosted, making them the in-between choice for light and privacy. They were a favorite of architects who wanted homes to feel modern, but still secure. Each glass block was thick, textured, and usually about 8 inches square. When stacked together, they looked like a frozen waterfall, a rippling grid of light. But over time, people started to see them as, well, a little strange. They aged poorly, were hard to clean, and made renovations a nightmare. Still, for a while, they represented a very specific version of the American dream: sleek lines, geometric patterns, and just a little bit of mystery. You could not see out, but the light still came in. And now, most are gone, replaced with clean panes and open views. But you never forget your first home that had a glass block bathroom. Now let us stay in that same spirit, walls that surprise you, with something that used to slide out of nowhere and separate an entire room like a magician's trick. Slap bracelets were the toy that hit your wrist and hit peak popularity, almost overnight. They were simple. A metal strip wrapped in colorful fabric that snapped around your arm with one satisfying motion. One moment it was straight, the next it curled tight, clinging to your wrist like a coiled snake. Every kid had one. Some had dozens, trading them like currency during recess. They came in neon colors, animal prints, sparkles, and cartoon characters. The louder the snap, the better. Some kids got so good they could slap them onto their arms without looking. But with popularity came problems. Schools started banning them. Parents worried about the metal underneath. Rumors flew about kids cutting themselves open with a rogue bracelet that had been peeled apart. That only made them cooler. Everyone wanted the forbidden accessory. Teachers tried to confiscate them, but they always found their way back into backpacks and onto arms. Slap bracelets were fun, fast, and a little dangerous, just enough to feel rebellious. They were not just toys. They were fashion statements, fidget tools, and tiny thrills rolled into one. And even now, the sound of that sharp snap is enough to take you right back to 4th grade. Furniture from thrift stores or curbside finds gave homes that mismatched charm only necessity could create. A sagging couch from someone else's garage sale, a wobbly coffee table rescued from the sidewalk, chairs with mismatched legs or beds with slats that creaked under every turn. This was what made a living room feel lived in. There was no delivery truck, just a neighbor with a pickup, or a slow push down the block with a dolly borrowed from Uncle Joe. You sprayed it down, you wiped it twice, and you made it yours. Some pieces were covered in throws to hide the rips. Others leaned against the wall to stay upright. But they had character, stories, a past you never asked about. In kitchens, the table might have a burn mark or a dent from years of use, but it still held dinner. In bedrooms, dressers groaned when you pulled the drawers, but they closed eventually. New furniture was for people with money. For everyone else, you took what you could get, and you were thankful for it. Because when money was tight, having something, anything, to sit on was a win. You did not care how it looked. You cared that it worked. Speak and Spell. A name so simple, you almost forget just how advanced it felt. This little orange learning machine had a robotic voice that felt both comforting and unsettling at the same time. The keys were rubbery. The screen was a small LED display, and the second it powered on, you felt like a kid genius. This was not just a toy, it was a computer. At least to us it was. And for a lot of people, it was the first time they ever heard a machine talk to them like a teacher would. It would ask you to spell elephant or photograph in that slow, mechanical voice. If you got it wrong, it would buzz like you had just activated some kind of self-destruct sequence. And if you nailed it, that same robotic voice gave you praise like it meant something, like it knew you. Speak and Spell was part game, part lesson, and 100% magic. You did not need Wi-Fi. You did not need batteries half the time. All you needed was the imagination to believe that this talking toy was the smartest machine in the house. And sometimes, it probably was. Of course, intelligence was one thing, but style? That was another story. If you were the kid with this next item, everyone knew you had your life together. That was thanks to ceiling-mounted radio speakers, built-in audio systems that piped mono sound into every room of the house. They were a mid-century dream, a touch of Jetsons-style modernity, long before smart homes were even an idea. The radio unit was usually installed in the kitchen or living room, with a big dial and a few large buttons. You could pick a station, adjust the volume, and suddenly, the whole house was in sync. Of course, these systems had limitations. There was no surround sound, no playlists, just whatever the station was playing that day. But at the time, that was luxury. It was like the house had a voice. Eventually, stereo systems, boomboxes, and personal devices replaced the need. But if you ever stood under one of those tinny speakers and listened to Glenn Miller on a crackly station, you knew you were living in the future. Speaking of visions of the future, what about a bathroom that was all one color? Scratch and sniff stickers made notebooks smell like fruit salad or something pretending to be. Grape, banana, pizza, popcorn, if it existed, there was probably a sticker that gave off a chemical approximation of it. These tiny scented rewards were currency on the playground. You earned them from teachers, you traded them with friends. You collected them in sticker books and flipped through your favorites like a sommelier of glue and artificial scent. Some smelled better than others. Some were so strong they made your eyes water. Others lost their smell after a few scratches but were kept anyway, honored like faded trophies. You knew the popular ones: root beer, bubble gum, and anything with glitter. You also knew the duds, like liverwurst or mystery meat, that somehow ended up in your binder anyway. Scratching a sticker in class was a quiet act of rebellion. You were not supposed to, but you did. And then you passed the notebook around so others could sniff and nod in approval, or gag in horror. Scratch and sniff stickers were low-tech fun with high nostalgic value. They turned paper into treasure. And even today, one whiff of fake strawberry is enough to transport you straight back to 3rd grade with a smile. Using layaway plans was how your family brought home the things they could not afford all at once. The process was simple but long. You picked something out, paid a little now, and waited. Every week or every paycheck, your parents went back to the store and handed over a few more dollars. The items stayed behind the counter, out of reach, until that last payment clicked everything into place. Maybe it was a winter coat. Maybe it was a bike for Christmas. Sometimes it was furniture or shoes or something that felt big, because it was. You did not get instant gratification. You got slow, hard-earned reward. There was no credit card swipe, no overnight shipping, just weeks of waiting, hoping, and counting. You learned patience. You learned value. And when that final receipt was signed, it felt like winning something impossible. Other families might have walked out with full bags. Yours walked out with pride. Layaway meant you were not giving up. You were building towards something, one payment at a time. And even now, when you buy something in full, you still feel that echo, the deep understanding that waiting made it sweeter. The Columbia House penny deal felt like a loophole in the universe. You sent in a little card, maybe glued a few stamps to it, and next thing you knew, your mailbox was blessed with 12 brand new cassette tapes, or compact discs if you were ahead of the curve. All for just 1 cent. 1 cent. It felt like a scam in your favor. No way this is real, you thought. But there it was. Whitney Houston, Prince, Bon Jovi, Huey Lewis, boom! Delivered to your doorstep like you were some kind of record label executive. Of course, the catch was that you had to buy more albums at full price later. Parents were suspicious. Some tried to stop you. Others fell into the trap themselves. It was like a rite of passage, a shared secret, a little music heist you got away with, until the bill came due, of course. Still, there was no denying the power of opening that box. Shrink-wrapped covers, that new plastic smell, your very own collection. But for real-time music discovery, you only needed one thing, 3 letters, 1 channel, and a whole lot of attitude. Long before cell phones and even before cordless landlines, families had a different way of yelling through the walls. And no, it was not just yelling. We are talking about intercom systems. Installed in kitchens, bedrooms, garages, and hallways, these things were high-tech at the time. Built right into the wall, they had push buttons, tinny speakers, and a magical call button that could summon anyone from anywhere. It was like living inside your own hotel. "Dinner's ready!" would echo from speaker to speaker. You could check in on the baby, call the kids in from the yard, or talk to your spouse while still folding laundry. They even had a radio function in some fancier models, so you could blast the news or music in every room. These systems were sold as time savers, but they also showed off how cutting-edge your home was. Nothing said modern American household like a wall-mounted microphone next to your fridge. Eventually, of course, they wore out. The wiring went bad, or the kids used them to eavesdrop. And just like that, they fell out of style, replaced by text messages, smart speakers, and yelling again. But if you ever stayed at Grandma's house and heard your name echo through a crackly little box, you will never forget it. Now, how about something we used to build into the wall that flipped down like a magic trick? Get ready, because we are unfolding something special. Rubik's Cubes sat on coffee tables like miniature monuments to frustration. Their colorful sides promised fun, but more often delivered rage. You twisted, you turned, you thought you had it, and then disaster. One wrong move sent you back to square one. Solving it became a badge of honor. If someone at school could actually complete a Rubik's Cube, they were treated like a genius. Crowds gathered, applause broke out, but most of us faked it. We peeled off the stickers and rearranged them to make it look solved, or we popped out the pieces and snapped them back into place. Technically cheating? Maybe. Spiritually rewarding? Absolutely. There were books, guides, even videos explaining how to beat the cube, but few had the patience. And yet, we all kept trying. Rubik's Cubes lived in junk drawers, backpacks, and classroom desks. They were part toy, part puzzle, part stress test. Looking back, they were frustrating, addictive, and completely iconic. And to this day, if you spot one on a shelf, your hands remember the rhythm of twist, turn, twist, even if your brain still has no idea how to actually solve it. DIY haircuts at home were a gamble wrapped in a towel and held together by hope. The kitchen turned into a salon. A dining chair became the barber's throne. Mom or dad grabbed the dullest scissors in the drawer and told you to sit still. You did. Kind of. And snip by snip, your identity changed. Bangs went crooked. Sideburns vanished. One side always ended up shorter. They tilted your head like that would help. You watched the clumps fall, hoping for the best. Sometimes it ended in tears, sometimes in laughs, but most often in silence and a baseball cap. You went to school the next day pretending nothing happened, but everyone knew. They always knew. DIY haircuts were not about style. They were about saving $20 and making it stretch. Hair grew back, groceries did not. So you endured the bowl cuts, the buzz jobs, the too short layers that stuck out like antennas. You got used to it. And after a while, it became normal. A family ritual, a budget tradition. Looking back, those crooked cuts carried more than just uneven lines. They carried effort, sacrifice, and a strange kind of love that you only see when the hair starts to grow in. Owning a Trapper Keeper in the 1980s felt like owning a briefcase made just for kids, but with neon colors, Velcro, and personality. These were not just folders. These were statements. You did not just store your homework in a Trapper Keeper. You stored your identity. From bold geometric designs to wild illustrations of race cars, dolphins, or laser grids that looked like they belonged in a science fiction movie, the outside of your Trapper Keeper said something about you. And that satisfying rip of the Velcro? That was music. It had pockets for pencils, slots for notes, compartments you never used but felt cooler just knowing they were there. There was something so absurdly organized about them that it made you want to turn your life into a schedule. You would write the dates on your notebook dividers, color code your subjects, and then forget all of it by Wednesday. But hey, the effort was there. You felt important carrying one around. It made you feel like you were growing up, and even if you never opened it for anything other than doodling weird cartoons during math class, it still felt like a win. But when it came to keeping track of things, there was one object that really made you feel like a collector, and not just of stuff, but of memories. Let us talk about the Rumpus room. If the living room was where adults behaved themselves, the Rumpus room was where the kids got wild. Usually tucked away in the basement, this was the unofficial playground of every suburban household from the 1950s to the 1970s. Carpeted in wall-to-wall shag, lit by lava lamps, and often filled with beanbag chairs, dartboards, and mismatched furniture, the Rumpus room was every child's dream and every parent's secret weapon. You could send the kids down there for hours, let them roughhouse, make noise, and burn off all that energy while the grown-ups enjoyed some blessed peace upstairs. It was not about looking nice, it was about cutting loose. Some had jukeboxes, others had board games stacked to the ceiling, and every now and then, you would find a couch that doubled as a trampoline. It was chaos, but it was controlled chaos. Over time, the idea faded as homes got bigger and open concepts took over. Now, everything is multifunctional. But there was something beautiful about a room that existed just for noise, mess, and memory making. The name says it all, Rumpus. No rules, just vibes. But even in the loudest house, you still needed a way to call the kids upstairs. And you will not believe how we used to do that. Boombox battles turned sidewalks into stages and backpacks into speaker cabinets. In the 1980s, carrying a massive boombox on your shoulder was more than a way to listen to music. It was a declaration. You had style, you had taste, and you had batteries heavy enough to power a small city block. These machines blasted everything from hip-hop to hair metal, and they did not ask for permission. You walked down the street with your soundtrack trailing behind you, volume all the way up, head nodding to the beat. Some kids parked them at basketball courts. Others lined them up outside corner stores. Whoever had the best bass usually won the crowd. Tapes were traded, dials were turned, and sometimes spontaneous dance-offs broke out right there on the pavement. Boomboxes were heavy, awkward, and impossible to ignore. But in a time before smartphones and Bluetooth, they were portable pride. They made noise. They made statements. And if you saw someone approach with a fresh cassette in hand and a boombox on their shoulder, you knew something good was about to happen. Boombox battles were not just about the music. They were about being seen, heard, and remembered. If these wild 70s memories made you laugh, drop your funniest story in the comments, give this video a like to keep the nostalgia rolling, and subscribe so you never miss another trip back to the days when safety was just a suggestion.